NetsBoy, so let's hear what he has to say. His name is NetsBoy, he thinks the world is all over when the Nets just can't play. What up, Net fans? NetsBoy here, bringing your latest in your Brooklyn Nets news. All right, this is the episode I think most of you have been waiting for. My 2016-17 Brooklyn Nets predictions and expectations. Woo! Okay, so let me just dive right in. I've been doing a lot of research, looking at the Nets team and the moves they did and all this stuff, as well as going on YouTube and looking at other YouTube channels from basketball people who just like me, who post videos about the NBA and so on and so forth, and hearing out their predictions and expectations of the Nets. And I have to say, I feel like people are being a little bit too critical of this Nets team and a little bit harsh. I also think that a lot of these third-party sources are trying to be too objective without actually knowing everything. A lot of these sites have been people who've been, or these videos have been people who try to analyze the NBA as a whole, so they don't really specialize on one team, and so they don't really do the right amount of due diligence and research, I feel like, to properly analyze the Nets. For example, I'm not going to say the person's name or their channel or anything, but there was a person who's critiquing the Nets, comparing this team to last year's team, that completely omitted the fact that Jarrett Jack tore his ACL last season and missed more than half the year. I don't know how you can possibly compare these teams in the seasons without bringing that up, because that's such a major impact to what happened to the Nets last season. So that's just an example of someone who doesn't really follow the Nets trying to be objective and coming up with predictions, compared to someone like me who watched almost every single Nets game last season. I didn't see everyone because things happen, but most of them, and followed the team basically religiously. So my point is, I feel like my analysis of the Nets might be a little bit better than the rest of these videos that these people have been posting. That being said, I do have a history of being a little overly optimistic, at least when it comes to the Nets record. Last season, I believe I predicted the Nets to win 34 games. I still kind of think that was a very reasonable amount of wins based off the team last year. I think if Jarrett Jack didn't tear his ACL and miss more than half the season, which was a huge blow, and if Hollis-Jefferson didn't get hurt and miss more than half the season, if Chris McCullough could play earlier on, if Brook Lopez and Thaddeus Young weren't shut down for the last 10 to 15 games, if there wasn't a coaching change halfway through the season, I think the Nets could have won around 30-ish games. So I think that was actually more accurate than what it really became last season. But my point is, sometimes I get a little ahead of myself being a passionate Nets fan, and I get a little over-optimistic. So I'm going to try not to do that this year, but I feel that's going to happen anyway. I always try to see things positively. I mean, why wouldn't I? I'm a Nets fan. So let's just look at this Nets team now. The moves the Nets made: Sean Marks basically went after young, unproven players with lots of potential and talent. That was obviously his strategy. He did a good job getting players like that. I know he missed Tyler Johnson and Alan Crabb, but, bringing in players like, Jeremy Lin, the Nets' biggest free agent, like him, and I think Justin Hamilton is a player that's pretty solid, and drafting Karis LeVert and Isaiah Whitehead, and developing them, as well as seeing what Hollis-Jefferson and Chris McCullough could do in the next, year or so, as they develop. I think it was really solid. And I really like the veterans that Marks brought in as well. And I think that was a key thing the Nets missed last season, was true depth and veteran leadership. I know, Brook Lopez, he's the guy. But outside of him, they didn't really have anybody. I know Young was kind of a veteran leader last year. Jack was the veteran, but you need a little bit more than that. And I really like the fact that the veterans are bench guys. Gravis Vasquez, I love this signing. I think he's going to take a lot of pressure off of Lynn and Whitehead to have to be that great, because he is a great point guard. Like a solid, traditional point guard who can control the tempo of the game, and he can come off the bench, and he could start if Lynn were to get hurt. I really like him a lot. I think Scola was a good signing. He's a quality big. Take some pressure once again off of people like McCullough and Bennett, so they don't have to go out there right off the bat and really prove themselves. And then there's Randy Foye, who's just a proven scorer, and he's going to take some pressure off of Levert and Whitehead and Rondé Hollis-Jefferson for having to really make a huge impact right off the bat, because he's a capable scorer. So I like those veteran signings, and I think that's going to make the Nets better than what they were last year. I really like Trevor Booker as well. Trevor Booker's signing, I think, was fantastic. He is such an explosive athlete, such an exciting player. He's a great rebounder, great energy guy, and he has the potential to knock down the mid-range jump shot out to the three-point line, which is always a good characteristic. I think that's great. Bojan Bogdanovic, I'm kind of like on the fence with still. Like, I've never seen a guy score 2 points one night and 44 the next night. I mean, who knows? But I like Kilpatrick. I like. Obviously, I like Lopez. I like Levert. I like Whitehead. I like a lot of these players and the potential they have. That being said, the key word here is potential. A lot of times, players don't reach their potential. So, the Nets could be a very bad team next year. They really could. I don't think they will be. I mean, they're not going to be a good team. They're not going to be, let me put it this way, they're not going to be a terrible team, but they're not going to be a good team. They're going to be a bad team, but not worst team in the league bad, like a lot of people are expecting them. I see it more as a bottom 5 team. I think they can go finish anywhere from worst record, because they can still always finish with the worst record, you never know, to 5th best record. Not 5th best. Yeah, that'd be great. 5th worst record in the NBA. So they're a bottom 5 team, but they're not as bad as it. A lot of people were saying that they're going to compete with the 76ers for the worst record. I don't think they're going to be that bad. And the truth of the matter is, though, a lot of it has to do with these guys developing. Can some of these guys who Sean Marks is going out on a limb on become the next solid player? And I'm going to be honest, it really comes down to Jeremy Lin. That's the truth of this team. He is the X factor. We know what Brook Lopez is going to give you. He is a 20-7 player. Doesn't give you much more, doesn't give you much less. As long as he's healthy, you can almost pencil in Brook Lopez for 20 points, 7 rebounds, and like 2 blocks. Like, you know what you got out of him. You look at the rest of the team, I mean, Trevor Booker, you know he's going to give you energy and rebounding. Rondé Hollis-Jefferson, you don't know what you're going to get from him offensively, but you know he's going to give you really solid defense and energy. I think Bojan Bogdanovic, he's going to give you capable scoring on some nights. And then the bench, Gravis Vasquez, I think he's going to give you solid point guard play. Randy Foye's going to give you scoring. Sean Kilpatrick's going to give you scoring. Louis Scola is going to give you solid big play, and Justin Hamilton's going to give you solid big play. Like, you can kind of know what those guys are going to do. Then you've got the young players like Chris McCullough and Anthony Bennett, Levert, and Whitehead. You don't really know what those guys are going to do. They could be great, they could be bad, you don't know. But they're not going to be significant players off the bat. Like, if you look at this Nets starting lineup, it's going to most likely be Lin, Bogdanovic, Rondé Hollis-Jefferson, most likely Booker and Lopez. Scola could compete, but most likely Booker or Lopez. And like I said, you know what you're getting from those guys. I mean, that's not a terrible starting lineup. It's not a great starting lineup, but I don't think it's terrible. I mean, you got the scorer in Brook Lopez, the low post guy. You got the energy guy in Trevor Booker. You got the defender in Rondé Hollis-Jefferson. You got a perimeter scorer in Bojan Bogdanovic, and then you've got the X factor, Jeremy Lin. Lin, I think Lin is going to be a solid point guard. I don't think he's going to be a superstar, Linsanity. I don't think he's going to even be an all-star. I think he's going to be a solid to good starting point guard. I think he's going to give the Nets quality minutes, 14 to 16 points a game, around 5 assists, control the tempo of the game, be the floor leader like he's supposed to be, and I think he's going to be solid. I don't see him being more than that. He is capable of more, but I don't see him being more than that. I also don't see him being much worse than that. I think that he's proven that he deserves to be a rotational point guard and that he deserves the opportunity to be a starter. And I do see him being a 14-5, 16-5 player. If he's a 14-5, 16-5 player, I think this Nets team will be okay. You know, you look at their bench, I think that's the biggest difference between this Nets team and last year's Nets team. There was no depth on the team last season. I mean, you saw what happened. Jack went down and they had Shane Larkin and Donald Sloan as their backup guard. Like, that was not good. Thomas Robinson had to play significant minutes when they shut down Lopez and Young. When Hollis-Jefferson got hurt, they were playing, Wayne Ellington, one of my least favorite players of all time. Players like that, there was no true depth to this Nets team last season. That's, to me, the biggest difference between this team and last year's team. The Nets have some depth. You got Gravis Vasquez at the backup point guard position, a guy who can be a starter if needed. You got Randy Foye, who's a fantastic scorer. Sean Kilpatrick, who we know is a fantastic scorer as well. Luis Scola is someone who could easily be a starting power forward if needed. So they've got the depth that they didn't have last season. Justin Hamilton, Chris McCullough is going to be a third. Chris McCullough and Anthony Bennett are going to be competing for the third string. They were two. That's a big deal. The backup power forward, small forward spot to me is a little up in the air. We know Ronda Hollis-Jefferson's going to start. Who's going to be the backup? Is it going to be LeVert? Are the Nets going to go small and slide Kilpatrick there? Are they going to slide Bogdanovich there and then let Kilpatrick be this two guard? What exactly are the Nets going to do? I think that they have a lot of versatility, though, which is also a thing I like about this Nets team. Every player on this Nets team, except for Brook Lopez, can play multiple positions. I'm not even making that up. Lynn can play the one or the two. Vasquez can play the one or the two. Whitehead can play the one or the two. Bogdanovich can play the two or the three. Kilpatrick can play the two or the three as well, just a small three. LeVert can play 1, 2, and 3. Foy's really more of a 2, but he can play the 1 if needed. Ronnie Hollis-Jefferson can play the 1, 2, or even, not the 1, can play the 2, 3, or even the 4. Chris McCullough can play the 3 and the 4. Heck, even saw him play some center in the summer league. Anthony Bennett, he's really more of just a pure 4, but he can play some 3. Scola can play the 4. You know what I'm getting at? 4 of the 5. Justin Hamilton can play the 4 of the 5. These players can all play multiple positions, which to me is very, very good. There's a lot of versatility that Kenny Atkinson has, which is another reason why I like this team. So the rotation could be very interesting to see what Atkinson does, and they have options and they have depth. Even Joe Harris, who I think is going to be a very irrelevant player, but, he could play the 2 or the 3. So you have a lot of versatility with this Nets team, and I just really like that. And I think they have much more depth than last year, which is why I think they're a better team. And you know what? I think the starting lineup's better. Maybe not necessarily better, because I think Thaddeus Young, Trevor Booker is a downgrade from Thaddeus Young, sort of, because Booker, I think, is a very capable power forward. I think Lynn is about the same level at Jack at this point, but has a higher ceiling. And then Bogdanovich, Ronnie Hollis-Jefferson, and Lopez, they were going to be the starters last season. They're still there now. So I think the starting lineup is a little bit worse, only because the unproven nature of Lynn as a point guard, even though I think would be just as good as Jack was last year before the ACL injury, and the fact that Booker, I think, is a couple notches below Thaddeus Young, but still very capable. So the starting lineup might be a little bit worse, but the bench, to me, is significantly better. The depth is better. I think the Nets actually have a much solid bench this season than they did last year, which is going to play huge for if injuries happen. Like I said, if injuries didn't happen last year, I think they could have won 30 games. Now that if injuries do happen this year, they've got a little bit more depth and opportunity to sustain it. So now, let's look at what I really think the Nets will do record-wise. Last year, I said 34 wins. Heck, I might have even said 38. I don't think I said 38, but I don't even remember. I might have to go back to my NetsBoy archives and see. I'm pretty sure I said 34. This year, I'm going to say 30. 30 wins. A lot of people say they're going to win 21 games or do the same they were about last season. No. Because like I said, last year's team was terrible. When you have Henry Sims, Willie Reed, Shane Larkin, Wayne Ellington as your key players, that team is terrible. They're going to be better than last year's team. How much will be determined on what these players do. Does Lynn take his game to the next level? Does Lopez stay healthy? Does Lopez take his game to the next level? I've always said this about Brook. I really feel like he's a 24-10 capable player. He doesn't always play that way, but he's capable of 24 points and 10 rebounds, especially if he's the guy. He could take his game. I mean, he's 28, but he can still get better too. You know, I think Trevor Booker, he can get better. He's also 28 or 29, but I think he's going to be his first opportunity to really prove himself. He could get better. So, Lynn, he could get better. Like, there's a lot of potential with this Nets team. That being said, if these players don't hit their potential at all, say Lynn becomes a bust, say Booker doesn't really do any better, Lopez gets hurt, Rondae Hollis-Jefferson doesn't get any better, McCullough doesn't get any better, these young guys don't get any better, Bogdanovich is inconsistent, yes, this Nets team could be the worst team in the league. I don't expect all that to happen. I think that you're going to see a solid play from Lynn, solid play from Booker, solid play from Rondae Hollis-Jefferson as long as he stays healthy. You know, Lopez, as long as he's healthy, we know what he is. Solid bench play. That's why I'm predicting 30 wins. That doesn't mean this Nets team is going to be making the playoffs, because 30 wins is not going to get you in the playoffs. But my point is they're not as bad as everyone else is saying. That being said, my bold prediction, because you know I love making bold predictions. My bold prediction, and this is very bold, and it probably won't happen, but I just feel like I want to say this. My bold prediction is the Nets making the playoffs. What? Yeah, hear me out here. It's a bold prediction. It's the key of it being bold. It's very out there. But if everything goes right, which in the history of the Nets doesn't seem to really happen, but that's why it's bold. If everything goes right, if Lopez stays healthy and puts up 20 and 8, if Jeremy Lin takes his game to the next level and becomes an 18 and 7 player, which is possible, if Rondae Hollis-Jefferson stays healthy and becomes the solid defensive player he is and becomes a capable scorer, scores about 10 points a game and gives you good defense, if Bogdanovich finally plays consistent and gives you double-digit scoring, if Booker gives you the energy you need, if players like LeVert or Whitehead or Chris McCullough take their game to the next level and become quality rotational players, this Nets team could very easily make the playoffs if those things happen. If some of those things happen, they could compete for the playoffs. If none of those things happen, they're going to be terrible. But that's my point. If everything goes according to plan, especially Jeremy Lin, I can't stress that enough, how much of an X factor he is. He is the key to this Nets team. If Lin sucks, the Nets will suck. If Lin plays okay, the Nets will be okay. If Lin plays great, the Nets won't be great, but they'll be good. So he is the key. So that's why it's a bold prediction, because everything has to go right. But we've seen that happen. Look at a couple years ago when the Hawks won 60 games. No one expected the Hawks to win 60 games. Now, they did have, Al Horford and Paul Millsap and Jeff Teague, all really good established players. But people like, DeMar Carroll came out of nowhere. Everyone's like, what? Then Kent Bazemore came out of nowhere. Like, what? No one expected that from those players. Dennis Schroeder, no one expected him to become as good as he was. That wasn't expected. Kyle Korver, he was always a solid player, but he had a great year that year. He came out. He was an established player who took his game to the next level that everyone was like, wow. And what happened with that team? They won 60 games. They did lose, in the Eastern Conference Finals, right? But still, no one expected that team to be that good. Now, they still expected them to be a good team because of Teague, Millsap, and Horford, but no one expected the rest of those guys to play the way they did. And I don't want to compare them too much to the Hawks, because they're not going to be as good, but it's kind of the same idea with this Nets team with my bold prediction. If these players play the way they're supposed to, Lin and Lopez, and then you get a couple shockers like Rondae Hollis-Jefferson, like a Karis LeVert, like a Chris McCullough taking his game to the next level, and they play solid defense. That's the other thing. They got to play great defense, because that was the key to the Hawks. They played great defense. I see them sneaking into the playoffs. I do. I think they could be a 41 win team, 42-ish, around 4,500 team if those players become that good. But once again, that's my bold prediction. That's obviously what I want to have happen, but my true expectations and feeling is that they're going to be around 30 wins. But they're going to be a fun team to watch. It's going to be interesting to see who develops, who becomes good, and what happens. And I'm excited for this season. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happened. And yeah, there you have it. So there are my Nets expectations and predictions. Went a little bit longer than I wanted to. Hopefully you stayed through the whole video. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know what players you're excited to watch, what you think of this Nets team, how many wins you think they'll have, so on and so forth. And let me know if you think my bold prediction is just a little too bold and overly optimistic. It might be. I'll be honest. But I really do think this Nets team will be better than people think. I certainly don't see them being worse than last year. I just think that they'll be about a 30-win team, maybe a little bit lower than that, maybe 28 wins. But I do think that they are better than last year, and I think 30 wins is a pretty solid expectation. So keep your eyes open for the next NetsBoy episode. I believe my next one will be my Eastern Conference predictions. It's always fun. And then after that, I got my 100th episode, which I kind of got to get going with that, figuring out exactly what I'm going to do. I have some ideas, but, that's put on the back burner. So keep your eyes open for the next NetsBoy episode. And until then, this is NetsBoy, signing off.